Welcome to the Hardwood Hustle. We've got another good episode for you today. I think it's one of those episodes where we're probably going to talk about the question we get asked often of players having problems. And they're in their feelings, there's emotions. As coaches, we do all the work. Maybe we've done all the player development work, the scouting report, the strategy we get, but something's just off. Some players just not in a line. We have 4 players on one mission and one player's not on the same mission. Sam, I can't tell you how many times we get questions about this. How many times a season or a game is derailed by maybe some player that I'm not going to call, a thorn, but maybe they're just not on the same page. Maybe they're just a little bit of a distraction. And we're going to talk about a quote Steph Curry had the other day because it applies to this very common question that we get. But they were going into a game 7 against Sacramento. They just lost at home. Guys didn't look ready. I think some people speculate who the quote is towards, but he said basically, hey, if you're in your emotions, or as a lot of times I hear, if you're in your feels, don't even get on the bus. And this is a pretty common thing that we hear about. Well, this player, you can see it coming into practice sometimes. This player's in their feels. This player's in their emotions. You can see it in a particular game. They don't like what somebody else said, did. This happens for a multitude of reasons. Girls basketball, maybe they're bickering a little bit. They don't like something that's going on off the court. Guys basketball, maybe a guy's taking too many bad shots or whatever. But players get into their feels and it throws everything off. No matter how much prep work, no matter how much gym time you put in, if their emotions aren't right, if their mindset isn't there, it can cause you some major problems. So, Sam, why don't you give a little bit of the background on the story, and then we'll dive into this and maybe some ideas that we can talk about of what coaches can do to help avoid some of these pitfalls.
All right, so the backstory, you set it up a little bit. It's Sacramento Kings, Golden State Warriors. They just lost game 6. They're going into game 7 on the road. And the night before, Steph Curry's Draymond sends Steph a text message like 3:45 in the morning. And Steph's like, hey, I got this. Because Draymond's usually the vocal leader. And so he goes in and before film session, he basically says to what you spoke to is like, don't get on the bus unless you're ready to come win and compete and put aside any other things. Because, they got some guys that want a bigger role or don't like their minutes or don't like their touches. And Steph's like, we don't have time for that. It's time to go compete. It's time to go win. And then he goes on and has an epic performance of 50 points and just puts the team on his back. And I actually got a chance to watch most of that game, and it was special. I mean, it's like what me and you watch MJ do for so long in the 90s, with the Bulls. And so that's the setup. Now, I will say, TJ, along with this conversation, I think there's a piece to it. Sometimes players are in their feels or in their feelings for a reason, and maybe something real is going on at home. Maybe something real is going on in life, and they're feeling that way for a reason, right? So we as coaches always have to have a level of empathy for that. Then there's also this weird thing in coaching, I think, where good coaches, I think, have a high level of empathy, and then at times they don't have much empathy at all. And it's this weird dynamic that I think coaches have to be aware of. Like, if you're too empathetic, this may be controversial to say, I don't know if I'm going to say it the right way. If you're too empathetic, you might have a pretty soft team. I'll just say that statement. What do you think about that statement, me saying that?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think we battle this with raising our own children. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
mean, this is a hard line to draw. Like, I think about with my own kids. I want to be empathetic. I want to be loving. I want them to learn their lessons in a good way. But every once in a while, you got to walk softly and carry a big stick. You got to make sure that they understand that at the end of the day, this is where I draw the line. This can't happen. And so I vibe with what you're saying. I think there's a lot of truth in that there is a fine line between, what is empathy and what is crossing the line of this is not enough toughness. This is not enough. We have to kind of suck it up today kind of mentality.
Yeah, and there is a point in time where I think in any season this happens where we're talking through it. A player's unhappy, something's going on. You're talking through it. You're trying to lead them through it, and then you do have to hit a tension point, a point of like, are you on the bus or are you not? Are you going to sit in the seat where the team needs you to sit, or you want to keep trying to be something else? And so I think every coach and leader um, has to take on that challenge every year. I think that happens every year if you're coaching a team and I mean, I'm talking like if you're really straining and going for something great.
Yeah, I agree with you. And here's let's just talk a little bit of solution. I mean, I think we got to dive more into the problem, but I just got a thought I want to get at there on solution. There are certain things that are unavoidable that are going to happen without a doubt. Like there's 100% chance it's going to happen. And when I think about that and I'm preparing my team for the year, I love to talk about those things really early on. And so 100% chance that at some point in the season, somebody's going to get in their feelings and it's going to disrupt the chemistry of the team. It's going to disrupt the flow. Could happen in practice, could happen in a game, could happen, who knows where, off the court. It's going to happen. And so we oftentimes as coaches wait until it happens to address it. I talk about this all the time. I used to have beginning of the year meetings, which I think were very similar to most coaches. It's like, this is going to be the best year ever. What's everybody's dream? We're going to go 30-0. Let's da, 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 da. And then we hand out the new sneakers to everybody. And then we give them the new warm-ups and everybody's excited. And da, 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 all right, well, eventually you coach long enough and game one rolls around and 5 players don't play as much as they thought they would play. And then they get a little bit unhappy. And then one player thinks they're not getting enough shots. And like, that's just coaching basketball. That honestly, that's running a business. That's managing a family. I mean, that is life in general. That's going to happen. And so my early season meetings have changed drastically to start talking about, hey, listen, here's what's going to happen this season. We're going to have a lot of heartache. We're going to have a lot of things to battle through. There's going to be some sucky moments. There's going to be and we just talk about all of those things that are going to happen because we know they're going to happen and we know that adversity is going to be a part of the challenge. And so I think this goes into that category of 100% going to happen. Deal with it before it happens. And so I think you need to have a plan. What is the plan when people get in their fields? I mean, just do the numbers. You got 15 players on your team, and let's just say that 10 of them show up with a great attitude and 5 of them show up with a not so great attitude. I mean, that's 33% of your team, and that's just 5 of them. Let's just say 2 of them. Let's say 10% show up with a bad attitude that day, but you still have 13 out of 15 players that had a good attitude. And this is so true in just about everything. I mean, let's just say that you're a teacher and a coach, right? You got a class full of students that you really enjoy, but there's one just pain in the butt. And we all know that student can ruin the whole class for everybody. Well, what do we do about that as coaches? We have to make a plan to not allow that one to ruin the experience. And I think the same thing with our team. We have got to have a plan when people get in their feels.
Sorry to interrupt. I would, yeah, I think you're right on it, TJ. One thing that I think you should even speak into, because you've done this as a college coach, I would say, TJ, you do that in the preseason, but you also did that like a month or 2 ago when your season ended before, especially in the transfer portal era that we live in, player number 14 on your roster, and if he comes back and you only lose 2 players, he bumps up to player number 12. And he may have shown a little bit of his feelings throughout the season, and you anticipate, well, shoot, he thinks he's going to go have the best offseason he's ever had, and he's going to come in and maybe creep into that top 8, or maybe he thinks he's going to start. And you have those conversations like the off season before we even get there, so that he doesn't even come back to school. And I know some of our coaches listening are not college coaches, and it's not like you can push high school kids out the door necessarily. But I do think what I'm getting at is have the conversation, not about what only could be good, but what the reality of everybody's situation is. And reality is there's only 5 people that start, and then there's only 2 or 3 that are going to be getting the most shots on offense, and therefore everybody else has a lesser role than others, and you got to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a full-time thing. And if I could give coaches one piece of advice, it would be stay ahead of it. Like just keep staying ahead of it. Don't be behind it. And, so like you're referring to there, Sam, at the end of the year meetings, player number 14, this simple conversation. Listen, we're losing 2, you're going to number 12. We're recruiting 2 more. You might bump back down to number 14. And so you might go to 12. And at the end of the day, 12 is not going to play. And what we cannot have out of number 12 is lack of work and a bad attitude. So I need to be guaranteed, if you're going to have a roster spot here, that you are going to have phenomenal work ethic and a phenomenal attitude. Otherwise, it's going to hurt this team because it's not likely your play is going to have the greatest impact on the team. Now, look, I would love to see you have an incredible summer. I would love to see you work up into an opportunity to get on the floor. I would love to see that happen. But right now, let's talk worst case scenario. You come back, you're number 13, you don't play. Is that going to hinder the way you work, or is that going to hinder you having a great attitude every single day towards this team? Because if it is, we need to find you a better situation. And I think that's a real conversation at any level to be had. It sounds a little different if you're talking to high school or middle school, but setting the stage for that before it ever happens. And I think this is another thing that's really important about that, because we had this last year, flashback a year before, we had this conversation with one of our players. He's like, I just want a spot. I just want to be there. I just want to be on the team. I just want to practice. Beginning of the preseason, came out on fire, working their butt off, hard as they could. They just weren't good enough. And then a couple games in, here comes the attitude. Called him in the office, and I said, listen, there's no need for us to have this conversation. We already had it. And what you told me was this. Do you recall that conversation? I do. That's what the player said. I do. I recall the conversation. Okay. Now we need to decide. Do you still want to live up to what you told me in that conversation, or has your mind changed? As if your mind's changed, so is your role, so is your spot, because we've already had this conversation. It is crucial to have that before, because then you have it after the fact and you're in a lot of trouble. And, the next thing I would say is this too. Here's what players do. I don't know what the terminology for everybody is, but I know for college men, I'm betting on me. I'm betting on me. And all summer long, I'm betting on me to get to this place where I'm going from 14 to starter. And I like that. I like players that want to go after it. I want players that want to go after it. I don't want somebody to be happy being 14 on the bench. I want them to go after it. But at the end of the day, honestly, the 13 guys ahead of you are betting on themselves too. Number 6 is trying to get a starting spot. Number 4 is trying to get more shots. Number 2 is trying to go pro. You know what I mean? Like, everyone's trying to level up. And so when players say, I bet on myself, my experience, not many players know what it takes or are willing to pay the price that bet pays off. Now, I've had some, and it's a fun thing to watch. But a lot of players bet on themselves and don't put in the work.
Well, the whole key to me is what you said in there is you have the conversation before. Not during. I mean, you're going to have it during and after, but like before things start, you have the conversation. What is, if you get hired for a job and they say, here's what we're going to pay you, and you said, okay, I'm going to come in, and then you take the job and they start handing you roles and responsibilities you didn't know had. Hey, we need you every Sunday to come in and work from 9 to 5. And you're like, well, I thought I got my Sundays off. Well, there's a big problem now. You just took a job that you didn't know that was a part. It's like what does a good pre-marriage counselor do? Which I don't think my pre-marriage counselor listens to the show. We didn't have a good pre-marriage counselor. We talked about 0 things that were going to help us in marriage. he handed us a sheet of paper with like 30 questions that were fluffy, and they didn't touch like we didn't talk about, okay, what are expectations of how many kids do you want, Sam? Sarah, how many kids do you want? What are you going to do with your finances? How many times a week, Sarah, do you expect to have sex? Sam, how about you? Like there's there's things that you got to talk about as a premarital counselor, and good premarital counselors, they do that.
And, like most good coaches, Sam went where most people wouldn't go, and you're having those hard conversations right there. But it's real. I mean, it is real. I think these are the conversations that we have to have with our players. And this is where, look, a lot of coaches don't like that. They don't like controversy. They don't like problems, and I understand that. But you have to also understand this, that you signed up for a job where you are guaranteed problems and unhappy people. And
So
what
wait, hold on that. I'm sorry to interrupt, but okay, the coaches that like we know coaches, right, that don't like conflict. And I wouldn't say like you and I, TJ, like love conflict, but I don't think we're afraid to step into it either. But we're all hardwired differently. My question to you is this: for the coaches that truly, gosh, they just don't like the conflict part of it, what's your coaching and encouragement to them that could really help them? Like besides like, well, get out of coaching.
what do you love more? You know what I mean? Like what do you love more? I think the same thing in your marriage analogy. Like I sure didn't know everything I signed up for in marriage, right? But what do I love more? I love my wife. And so we're going to find a way. We might not have the same thoughts on finances or any of the other topics you talked about, but what do I love most? I love my wife. I love being married. I love the opportunity of building a family. And so therefore, I'm going to go through those things. Same thing with a team. What do I love? I love a team with one heartbeat that's pulling in the same direction. I love a great culture. I love a team that wants to win. And so, yeah, I don't want all of those unhappy conversations. I don't want all those tough moments. I don't want all those, whatever it is in your life, bad administration, unhappy parents. I don't want all of that. But what do I want more? And what I want more is I want to win. What I want more, I want them to have been impacted and changed their life. I want them to have a first class experience of knowing what it's like to be on a team that loves each other. I want that more than I want to avoid conflict.
Yeah, I think that's good. Like, so you go right to the crux of the decision, because did we talk about this? Maybe this was a previous show, but you're saying when you say no to the conflict now, you're saying yes to the conflict later, whether outwardly or you're going to be sitting at home on a Friday night having inner conflict that's going to eat you up. And so I think that's a great point. Like you got to choose it. It's just a matter of when you want to choose to tackle that or have that fight.
Yeah. And so, I think another thing that we could talk about is like, what about when it's actually happening? Like, what tools do you have? I mean, let's just say you're 10 minutes into a game, right? Or, I mean, I think take the Golden State experience. Like, I think that they lost one at home to seal the series, where I think Draymond and Steph really felt like, all right, guys are in their feelings, right? And
Yeah.
so now who cares? We got to play game 7 in 2 days. What do we do? And so, like, let's talk tactics a little bit, and I think that one, obviously it helps if you have a great leader like Steph or Draymond, and I'm not saying they're both great leaders, but Steph is one of those guys that's not known for speaking up a whole lot, but he realized this is the moment, this is the moment. Hey, and I think Steph asked the same question. What do I want more? Do I want to avoid conflict with my teammates right now, or do I want to win game 7? He asked himself that question. And he stood up and said, maybe I don't like speaking in front of the team. Maybe this isn't who I am. But you know what I like more than that? I like winning more. I like going, and that's the decision they have to make. So leaders help with that. But we don't always have great leaders. We don't always have leaders with the right words that can say that, especially when they're younger, trying to decipher, how do I pull this person out of this rut or that rut? Here's some things I think that are really helpful. Sam, before each practice, we have every player, fist pound all of us as coaches. So they come by each person. And over time, you get to know that vibe. I mean, you can tell within 5 seconds, this person feels great today. This person's about even today, or this person's in their feelings today. And as soon as you get one of those fist bumps that says, I'm in my feelings, whoa, hold on a second, Sam. Come here for a second. You doing all right? I'm fine. No. You aren't fine. Yesterday, man, you gave me a fist bump and a hug and you were all smiles. Today, you didn't even make eye contact. What's going on? Right? Like, I think you need some of those things. I think you need awareness of the people around you. And if you don't know the people around you well enough to have an awareness of their feelings, you're not going to catch it beforehand.
And you need that because you need to teach your players how to work through those feelings and how to communicate. Like, do most people know how to communicate how they're feeling about a situation? The answer is no. Like adults, grown people don't, like, let alone kids. And I think that's one piece to it. The other piece is, as coaches, how are we growing and empowering our players to have a Steph like moment in the locker room? Because, like, if Steve Kerr stood up and said what Steph said, it doesn't mean as much. But then the fact that, or if Draymond set up, no, because Draymond talks a lot, but Steph doesn't do that. And so it was so impactful. Then there's times where Draymond says what he says that I imagine only coming from Draymond, it meant more. I want to read a couple other quotes, TJ, from this. You know, at the very end, Draymond, after Steph got done talking, Draymond yelled out, he said, "Enough said, champ." He goes, "Nobody got nothing. That's it. What else can be said?" And then the meeting was over. And there didn't need to be a lot of discussion. Steph said what he said. It's time to move on. And that's what they did. They went out on the court and Steph backed up in a big way what he just got done saying.
Yeah, he sure did. I mean, that was the most points ever in a game 7. And, but I think besides that, you can see the emotion that he played with. And man, it's nice to have a guy like that or a girl like that that can go out there and not just back it up with points or whatever, but back it up with the emotions as well. But we don't always have that. Sam, I got a question for you. So let's just say that you're going into this and it's game time and you recognize emotions and you recognize people in their feels, or you recognize it from the game before, people are in their feels. Do you hit it with the team? Do you hit it individually? I've got some thoughts on this, but I want to get yours. What is the right way to approach this for those that are trying to help their team avoid these pitfalls?
My tendency would always be to do it with the team, to put all the cards on the table. But I don't know that's not always the best approach. If you have one player and you bring that up in front of the team and they're not going to do well being called out in front of the team, they went further in the hole. So that wasn't a good decision. So sometimes the individual conversation is the right play. I mean, so the answer is yes. I mean, it depends. It depends on situation, depends on the kid, depends on the, like, what part of the season we're in. Is this something that's been kind of playing out for a long time? Last thing I'll say on it, TJ, coaches do make this mistake where they have an individual call out of a player and the rest of the team doesn't see it, and the rest of the team needs to see it because they think player A is getting passes from the coach, and guess what? The rest of the team, they're losing respect for the coach, and you got to be aware of that too.
Yeah, and I think this is the art of coaching. And coaches, I couldn't encourage you enough to work on this. And you might fail, but to really work on this, because I do believe there's a real art to this. And I think a lot of times we want it cookie cutter, like I do this in spot X and I do this in spot Y, but there's never just a right answer to that. I think knowing your team is super important. I think there's a multitude of ways you can do it. I mean, we were in the preseason this year and we have a player vying for a starting spot, and twice in one week he's late. He was late like overslept like 30 minutes one time. The other one, it was like just a minute late, but it was the second time he was late. And neither time I say anything to him. But at the huddle at the end of the practice on the second time, I said, hey, listen, just a reminder that coaches play players they can trust. And if you're not here on time, in fact, if you're not early and you're not putting in the prep work to get ready, I have a hard time trusting you. And I want you to know I'm rooting for everybody equally on this team. But I am going to stick with guys that I trust. And you can earn that trust on a daily basis. You can also lose that on a daily basis. And not showing up on time is a great way to lose trust. Never spoke to the player individually. Never called him over, never said anything, but he got the message and everybody knew who I was talking to. Everybody knew what the point was of that. Then there's other times when I might say something.
So sorry, let me interrupt. So that's a good story. So you indirectly but directly called him out.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, like, I like that. Like, I think you didn't say his name, but everybody knew it was him, right?
Yeah.
So is there a time where that kind of I don't know the answer to this question. I'm honestly asking it. Is there a time where not being direct hurts you?
Yeah,
Because
I think that's the art of it. I think there's multiple things that go into that. Like that particular situation, like I'm trying to speak really directly to a person, but really trying to speak to the habit more than anything. Like this is not an acceptable habit. This person happens to be having this habit, and I want that to change. I think there's also times when the whole team is tired of something and they want to know if you're on the same page with as they are, and you need to perhaps speak directly to that person in front of the group. Again, try not to be demeaning, but demanding, and I could flip that story and I could speak directly to that person. I think there's also times when it could be the opposite of that. I mean, I remember a guy that we had who was one of the best players I've ever coached off the court, was an okay talent, but never really played many minutes for us, and was always the first one there for like 4 years. And then one day overslept their senior year, and I called him in the group and I said, man, I just want to celebrate this guy for making his first mistake in 4 years. And we laughed about it, and it was a teachable moment. I said, this is incredible. He's always the first one here. And I was like, life's full of mistakes. You're going to make us. And then I gave the lesson about this. I said, but I also want everybody else to know in here that if you were late today, I would not be doing the same thing, because you have not paid the same price. You have not set the same example. And the lesson being that not all of you are going to be coached the same way. Not all of you are going to receive that. And I think that's another lesson. I think I remember this when Dina said this to me a long time ago. Dina, it was one of the original owners of PGC, and she was mentoring me. And she said, if you just open your eyes, there's 100 coachable moments every day. And there are 100 coachable moments. And him being late was a coachable moment. It doesn't always have to be hard. It was a funny moment. We all laughed. Like, they all gave him a hard time. And he was over there, and I thought he was going to cry, because the last thing he ever wanted to do was be late, and we just made a little bit of humor about it. But I said at the end of that too, hey, this is a guy that you never have to doubt. Why? Because watch the previous 3 years and then look at the pain on his eyes and in his face right now because he was late. This is a guy you don't doubt, I mean, and so you can praise and teach sometimes too. And then sometimes pull them aside. It's a one-on-one conversation. But learning that art is important.
Yeah, that makes me think of, there's a Coach K quote that says something like this: too many rules get in the way of leadership. They just put you in a box.
Even deeper, I like his wording of it. Rules are for those who are afraid to lead.
Yeah. People set rules to keep from making decisions. And it's so true. Like, that was one of the first books I read when I got into coaching was Leading with the Heart. And Coach K actually talked about that very scenario you just brought up, which is like, he had a freshman late to get on the team bus versus Tommy Amaker, who's now, Division I head coach, senior. If he's late getting on the bus as a senior, when you've built in, you've made deposits over time, and good leaders, they don't lead by rules. They lead through the art of leadership, through decision making. And so I think what you did there was a good example of that. I don't even know if we're still on topic here, TJ.
I mean, I think it is relevant to like dealing with issues, whether it's feelings, whether it's discipline, whether it's like how do you deal with that? And like that feelings one, I mean, we use the analogy of being on time or not being on time, but it could be the same thing when a player shows up and everybody knows they're pouting, and you give the same conversation and you say something, like this: "Hey, is this team still got the commitment to being great?" "Yeah, coach, we got the commitment to being great." "Okay. Well, let me tell you what we don't have time for if we want to be great. We don't have time for selfishness. We don't have time for bad attitudes. We don't have time for people being in their feelings about what they're not getting right now. We need people that are going after it." And everybody might know who you're talking about. You know what I mean? And so that conversation can be had about any of the things that you might deal with as a coach in those different ways. And sometimes, maybe before you call them out, this is kind of my rule of thumb, before I call it out to the team, I do want to check with that player and see how they're doing, especially if it's something that's like doesn't happen to them regularly. Now, if we're on the 14th time and we've had 5 conversations about it, hey, look, it's not about me and you anymore. It's about the team. And so I think the steps there, somebody has a bad attitude for the first time in 2 years, I'm thinking, what's wrong with this person? If it's their 10th time this season, I'm thinking, all right, we're to an unacceptable behavior that's now hurting the team, and now we got to go a different route.
And another thing a coach can do is they don't have to handle every conflict and adversity in the team. You need to teach your players. So like if a player's late, you may not even ever address it with the team. You might go to your senior leader and say, "Hey, we've had this player late twice in the last 4 days. Are you gonna fix this? You gonna handle this? Hey, do you need any of my support on this? What's going on?" Like, and that's I'm talking with a mature leader, and then hopefully you've taught them up to that point. So I don't think coaches always have to take on the brunt of all leadership decisions. Kind of like back to our original opening is like Steve Kerr didn't text Draymond and Steph. Steph and Draymond text each other, and I know some coaches are like, well, those are pros. Those are 30-year-old professionals. Yeah, so but those players took the ownership. They took the leadership in that moment. And I think we can teach players, whether you're coaching high school, middle school, college, pro, doesn't matter. I think you can teach it.
Yeah. So coaches, what to do when your players are in their feels, their emotions, and there's a multitude of reasons, but 100% chance that you're going to deal with this next season. So start working on your plan now. We want it to be a great season for you. We want to help you avoid pitfalls. That's why we talk about these types of things. So love to hear your thoughts. Hit us up at Hardwood_hustle. He is Sam. I am TJ. We are the Hardwood Hustle.
Thanks again for tuning into this episode of the Hardwood Hustle, where we believe in the value of a coach. Be sure to check us out on Twitter and Instagram at Hardwood_hustle to stay up to date on the latest episodes and share your thoughts with our coaching community. From the Hardwood Hustle team, thanks again. We can't wait to be with you again next week.